Farmers of Reddit, what did your animals do that made you go how the FK did you do that? One of my neighbors called me to let me know she had come home to find one of my young goats, like 5 months old, inside her house down the road. To this day we have no idea how the fuck that happened. No holes in either layer of fencing on my end. No other people in her home who could have brought him in there. She had no pet door and none of her doors was ajar when she got home. She did however have a few open windows on her second story, so we are thinking maybe he climbed a tree next to her house and jumped. But goats usually aren't very graceful or precise creatures, so no clue how honestly. Full grown Nubian goat, taking about 3/3. 5 feet tall at the shoulders. A good 150-170 lbs. Squeezed her bitchy fat ass through the 2x2 foot pop door in the chicken cooperative. For no other reason but to see what was in there. Then proceeded to climb up the 1 foot wide, 4 feet long particle board gangplank to the raised roosts and laying boxes when I tried to get the out of the coop through the man door. I still have no idea how a dinky ramp we built from scrap for chickens held her fat ass. She then taught her shorter but fatter daughter how to do it. This was done multiple times until fencing was altered so they couldn't get to the coop at all. They also get poop into places with scary accuracy. Just anything in the goat barn at risk if getting poop on or in it. Our cat was a stray that someone dumped, and she hung around our place for a while before we actually took her in. During that time, my grandma had gotten her hip replaced, and her nurses were worried she might trip on the cat while trying to get in the car for physical therapy appointments. So my grandma decided to let one of the nurses take the cat to the Humane Society, which was at least a few miles away, down many busy streets and a highway. 2 days after she took the cat there, I opened the door, and the cat was sitting right on the front stoop, looking peeved off. My grandma let her in, and said okay. She lives here now. I had a goat that would turn the barn lights off and on at night. No clue why he did it. And he always shut them off after turning them on. We weren't sure exactly WHO was working the light switch, but suspected it was him. He was a fairly bright individual. No pun intended. It was confirmed that it was indeed Chevy flipping them on off when we gifted him to a lady who fell in love with him when visiting the farm. And the lights had not been turned on by anything other than a human since. Had a donkey that would open gates for the horses and cows. Then he'd just walk through the fence into a closed pasture. I'd get back from running errands and the place would be a shitshow. The horses would be destroying the hay barn and the cows were in the neighbor's hay fields or tearing up the lawn. And the donkey is off on his own like he had nothing to do with it. Edit. Yes. This donkey inspired my username. We have a multiple who likes to wear my husband's underwear sometimes when we aren't home. He would raid the underwear drawer and somehow get the boxes on him the same way a human would wear them, with one of his hind legs through each leg hole. Then he would sit on the bed where he's not allowed. I guess he would just hang out and pretend to be people until we came home and, usually, caught him in the act. Once saw a cow that had tried to jump a 5-bar gate but not quite made it. The metal gate was bent at the top and one half of the cow was on one side and the other half on the other side with middle very squeezed. If I remember, we had to hood the cow so she wouldn't do more damage and get a metal cutter to take the gate to pieces. I worked in the office in the end of barn with a small window to my right. I was doing the wages and the light went out. It was the limousine bull looking in to make sure I'd got his wages right. I'm a wildlife rescuer and carer that I look after young and injured Australian wildlife before they are ready to be released back into the wild. My wombats always climb into my front loading washing machine. They also dig under fences and that lets the kangaroos move into different paddocks, so sometimes we find them in places we didn't sort put them and get very confused. Not a farmer, but mum has kept dogs, cats, alpacas, goats and pigs. One dog decided to run away and was found 40 miles away a day later, when she was so frail that she could hardly run. Also came home one day to her standing on the kitchen table surrounded by breadcrumbs with no chairs nearby. Cats we saw hunting a dozen miles from home on a long bike ride. They were home in time for tea. Alpacas don't do anything interesting ever. Pigs are pretty smart, so don't do anything dumb. Just don't let them find where you keep their feed. Goats are beyond stupid. Forgetting they have horns and getting their heads stuck in fences. To each other. In their feed buckets. To trees. The worst was, however, less amusing than all the others, where a goat had managed to hang itself by its collar on a tree. My parents' chicken barn was raided by coyote. We lost about half, 20-ish, chickens. We had a really distinctive rooster with huge feathers on his head that was gone after the attack, so we assumed he was dead. About 6 months later he came walking into our yard. My parents live on a mountain with bears, mountain cats, and of course coyotes, but that little fuck made it out in the wild on his own. He died a few years later of natural causes. I let my dogs out one morning and only one of the 3 came back. It wasn't unusual. I thought maybe they were down swimming in the pond and couldn't hear me or something, so I went outside to look for them. I checked the usual places and couldn't find them, so I started looking for tracks while calling them. As I'm walking down the driveway following their tracks, I hear this weird noise. Like a cowbell. We didn't have any animals with bells on, so I blew it off and kept looking for the boys. The stupid bell keeps getting louder, so I look up. My dogs found a goat and herded it home. My dogs are border collies, so herding things is nothing new. Especially for my oldest dog, who used to work cattle and sheep every day. Dex, the oldest dog, was 12 years old. He'd been retired for about 4 years. Arch, the puppy, was only 7 months and he had never seen stock in his life, but he knew exactly what he was supposed to do. To this day I have no idea where they found the goat. They weren't even outside that long, so it must have been close. We eventually found the goat's owner, but it took a week or so. We had a horse named Cheyenne that we honestly should have renamed Houdini. We rescued him and he had a pretty bad limp, but he was still able to trot around, but that was about it. Anything more than a trot was out of the question, and jumping was a no-go. Well, this limping horse could get out of any latch, electric fence, and bolted door we had. There were several times where Sod be eating dinner, look out the bay window, and saw Cheyenne munching on the flower bed in the front yard. Every time he got out, Wesod take him back and everything would still be locked. Every single time. No one ever saw him escape. Hasod just magically appear out of the fence. He called Sod jump, cause of his leg, so we know he wasn't Sod just clearing the 7-foot fence. The horse was magical, I swear. Used to work at a stable yard. 2 of the backfields had a 5-foot deep ditch between them with a small gap in the fence. Beyond our land was a massive cornfield. Discovered 3 horses missing one day. Turns out after multiple escapes they had figured out how to get through one fence, straddle the ditch and squeeze through the gap. Catching them after was a massive pain. Had to go cowboy on them. And there was the one horse who would always bite women's bums. Never men. Not really a WTF moment, but kinda wholesome. I was training to work on my university's dairy farm my freshman year. And towards the end of shift the student who was training me said, "Alright, let's go get sugar out of pet pen." Pet pen is a separate section of barn full of box stalls for sick cows and cows around freshening. Amazing is in there too because she is too dumb to figure out how to sit in a free stall. I'm going with it kinda confused because cows don't get straight sugar in their rations. But I'm still learning, so I'm down for whatever I'm told. Turns out Sugar is a 1,800-pound brown Swiss cow who could open the gates to pet pen during shift. She would go eat all the hay and TMR of the box stall cows. I've been there for 3 years now and it was common practice to just let Sugar do what she wants in pet pen. We would just tell her to leave after shift and she would open the gate back up and walk out. She was a hard-working cow and was rated excellent in her last scoring. Not me, but my dad. He grew up near Gettysburg and lived right next to a farm. Had a ton of cows. And a few bulls. He and my grandpa told me a story of how they woke up one morning to see their Bush's garden had been destroyed. And that massive piles of droppings were left in their yard. They took a look farther down the road and the bull is chilling right outside the pen. He wasn't aggressive or anything. Just wanted to snack on my grandma's plants. It never happened again after that. Same farm. But many years later, my dad would bring my mom home to visit and they would see the farm's 2 donkeys strolling down the road. With no supervision. The first time it happened they contacted the owners and they just said, oh yeah, they do that sometimes. Just give them another hour or so and they'll come back. And they always did. They take really good care of all their animals. Because they're both still alive and healthy and I'm in my late teens. The donkeys were a few years old when my parents first saw them. We had a goat that must have somehow been part mountain goat. We would get up in the morning to find him in the most ridiculous places. One morning we found him on the roof of the barn, which had an extremely steep pitch, nearly vertical, and the weirdest part is the roof was several feet off the ground on all sides. And there was nothing anywhere nearby it. The goat didn't want to come down at all, so we had to make a ramp out of a tractor and some scrap wood. My best guess is one of the horses somehow jumped the fence and the goat jumped on its back and onto the roof, spooking the horse, which went back into its own somehow. Either way, the little bastard cost us a bunch of time and effort and kept up with his shenanigans. I worked on a farm for a bit this summer. We had 2 pigs. Their pen had a duck pond and was surrounded by a wire fence. Nice place for them with a pretty large space to move around. They broke through the fence and ran loose around the farm for a while. I wasn't really surprising though, as it wasn't a very strong fence. We moved them to a stronger pen at the side of the barn. One of the walls was made of cinder blocks, the wall leading into the barn. And they broke the bricks. They managed to get inside and we had to lure them back into their pens and rebuild the wall. It's crazy. My granddad worked at a pet store where he did all the maintenance. They had a parrot that was the sweetest thing, very playful and very intelligent. She figured out how to unlatch her cage. So my granddad put a lock on it. A few weeks later, they came in one morning and found the parrot squawking and running around the store, just having a lovely time. They just assumed they'd forgotten to lock the cage that night. Put her back and open up the store as usual. A couple days later and she broke out again. The manager was annoyed and made sure from then on she personally locked the cage. Sure enough, the parrot broke out again. Stunned and mystified, they checked the CCTV of the previous evening and sure enough, they caught her picking the lock to her cage with her claws almost as soon as they left that evening. My granddad ended up fitting 5 or 6 different locks for that one parrot, as she figured out each in turn before they sold her. My dad grew up on a farm, but the funniest story is actually about his dog, which his dad wanted to get rid of. So he left the dog in the woods. Couple hours later the dog showed up back at home. His dad tried again. Actually sold the dog to a family who lived in the nearby town. 2 days later, dog was back. But his dad still didn't give up. Sold the dog again. To a family at least 10 kilometers away in a town the dog had never been to. And again. Dog shows up a couple of days later. My grandfather gave up on getting rid of the dog. Dog lived to be effing 16 years old. 12 would be normal, with just eating leftovers from the dinner table. Still one of my favorite stories of dad's childhood. So when growing up on the farm we had farm dogs. Not for herding or anything like that, but to protect the chickens, ducks and cats. The cats handled the rats but got eaten by coyotes. This protection normally took the form of barking to scare bobcats or coyotes away from the house and barns. Over the years the number of dogs increased from our original 2. Well, 3 generations into this line of guard dogs we had 1 dad, 1 mom, and 4 sons, all of adult age. Over the years they had eaten all the squirrels and moles on the property. One day I noticed that they had started roaming to local few square miles because I'd see them in the forest when driving home some days. They then caught 4 wild turkeys and ate them over a 2-day period in front of the chicken pen. I wake up one morning to see 3 of the sons dragging the thigh of a deer into the yard, half eaten by them. No big deal. Probably caught a sick or small doe left behind. A few hours later the head showed up in the yard carried by mom and dad. It was a 12-point buck. The dogs reverted into wolf pack hunting because the coyotes stopped coming around and the other small animals were all cleared out. TLDR. Guard dogs turned into pack hunting dogs that took down 12-point buck. Years ago we had this bull that was a solid 2,000 pounds, maybe a little over. And a citrus grove. We had a fairly large supply of cull fruit we would give to the cattle as a treat. Think of it as crack for cattle. This bull would go crazy for them. One day going to give them some fruit and there was this 1200-1500 LBS steer in between the bull and the fence. The bull, wanting the oranges, stuck his head under the steer's belly and using his head tossed this steer over a 5-foot fence. Witnessing it with my own 2 eyes, I was still like, how the FK? That's a good sized steer, and he tossed it like a ragdoll. Steer was okay but confused. For me, it was one of our farm cats. Her name was Scarecrow. She was a brutal killer. And would often come back with not mice, but rabbits and squirrels for her kittens. One day, I found her on the roof of one of our barns stalking a group of pigeons. It was about 60 feet high, as it was an old hay barn made entirely of wood and had a tin roof. I watched for a solid 20 minutes as she slowly crept closer and dove for the pigeons. She caught one and almost slid off of the roof in the process. I have absolutely no clue how she got it down from the roof nor how she got up there. But it was definitely the most noteworthy how the FK did you do that moments on the farm. I worked on a farm and I had to milk the goats one day to make some farm-made butter. Well, I had milked about 10 of these goats by hand and made about 3/4 of a bucket full of goat's milk. I saved the arsehole goat till last. Always awkward, doesn't odd matter what the situation. It's odd be an asshole. Well, surprisingly enough, this goat let me milk her no problem this one particular time. Stood there and let me get on and do it. When I had just finished getting all I could out of her, then she casually turned her head, looked me dead in the eye and just kicked the bucket over using her back leg, wasting all that milk and hard work for the butter. Before doing this goat loss, I put her back in with the other goats and it legit looked like she was bragging about what she had just done to the other goats. Safe to say that no butter was made that day. Not a farmer, but stayed at a hobby farm one weekend. Few acres. 4 horses. About a dozen small cows on the paddock the cottage was on. Horses. All good. Curious creatures. The cows. Not so much. I got a little close to one. She started chasing me. They all joined in. No problems. Lesson learned. About half an hour later, we're cooking dinner and the pair are staring at me through the kitchen window. Go to get my wife to have a giggle at these attack cows. Wasn't just those two. They'd paired up at every window and door and surrounded the house ready to pummel me. Cheeky gang. Not a farmer, but I had 30-something chickens. My daughter went out to feed and water them one morning and came into the house screaming. There was a chicken massacre. All of them had their heads completely removed and the barn was tarred in blood and feathered. We thought we lost them all, but about a year later we kept seeing a chicken roaming the woods and periodically returning to the cooper. She survived the winter in the massacre, and managed to feed herself. I know chickens are hardy creatures, but this was a complete surprise to us all. She is still with us today and is the only remaining chicken we have. She has moved to 5 hours north with us and is the scarredest of chickens I have ever seen. She runs fast as fuck and can easily clear a 20-foot roof with her glide upwards. Called her Stormy. Not a farmer. But when I was a toddler we had a dog who once escaped out of a 2-story window and climbed an almost 8-foot tall chain link fence just to wait at the front door for my dad to get home from work. We had another dog who we had to kennel if we were gone during the day because he would get into everything. Well, he started showing up at the door to welcome us home and we couldn't figure out how he was getting out. After a few times my dad set up a camera and this fucking dog was able to bend the kennel bars and wedge his giant body through them. Adopted a 3-year-old Mustang. A wild horse known for being easily spooked and hard to handle. Yes, I'd think. When they green broke him at the prison, they nicknamed him Sidhead because he wasn't not afraid of anything. We got him when I was 12, so every day after school I would walk to the borders and feed the horses. Fast forward a few years and one day I threw the hay in the feeder. Other horses come running but not Deadhead. Has sauce at the back of the property just standing there. Well, that's sauce weird. I walk over to find 3 of his feet tangled in barbed wire. Not at all injured. Not a drop of blood. Just standing quietly until someone came to rescue him. I got all his feet clear and he ran faster than I've ever seen him run to food. He got extra grain that day. For non-horse people. This is very strange behavior. Normal instinct if something touches their feet is to bolt and struggle because it's a snake. Right? How he figured out how to stand there quietly presumably all day I will never figure out. Damn, I miss that horse. The neighboring farm has goats and limousine cattle. Along with sheep and a few dairy cows. Limousine bulls are very large and not very friendly. And goats like to climb things. I drove past recently and saw a 1.5-ton bull standing there with a big billy goat standing on its back. No drama. Nothing strange. Just a great big goat standing on a huge bull who's also just standing there chewing its cud in the middle of an empty field. What? I stopped the tractor and just watched them for 20 minutes. And they were like nothing weird going on here. Just a totally normal animal trapeze act. Move along. Then a week later I see the bull laying under an apricot tree. With the same goat using it as a boost to get to the fruit it can't reach. That's where it happened.